5. 10 winters passed. On Rutgers Street in Chinatown, where Mama and Deming had lived pre-Bronx, there was a new high-rise on the corner. A white couple talking to a doorman in uniform. But farther down the block seemed unchanged. The same buildings with their reddish-brown exteriors, fire escapes, and hanging laundry. The old apartment at 27 Rutgers had been smaller than Roland's place, but home to Mama, Deming, and their 6 roommates. Daniel Wilkinson was 2.5 feet taller, 150 pounds heavier than Deming Guo had once been, with better English and shittier Chinese. Ridgeboro had made Daniel an expert at juggling selves. He used to see Deming and think himself into Daniel, a slideshow perpetually alternating between the same 2 slides. He wanted Deming to walk out of the building, for the 2 of them to do that little dance people did when they tried to pass one another on the sidewalk but kept moving in the same direction, over-anticipating the other's next move. Deming wouldn't have the scar on his right forearm that Daniel had gotten from skateboarding with Roland in 8th grade. While Deming was growing up in Chinatown and the Bronx, was Daniel hibernating, asleep in Planet Ridgeboro? Or had they grown up together, only parting ways after the city? Daniel had lay dormant in Deming until adolescence, and now Deming was a hairball tumor jammed deep in Daniel's gut. Or Deming had never left Rutgers Street. He'd been here all along. The front door of 27 Rutgers squeaked open, and a woman with a bouquet of grocery bags walked out. Worried he might seem like a creep, Daniel took out his phone and pretended to text. He knew it wouldn't be Deming. Couldn't be Deming. Yet he felt wasted with disappointment. Under the Manhattan Bridge, the sounds around him coalesced. The fruit and vegetable vendors here were speaking Fujonese, and he knew what they were saying. The words not nonsense sounds, but sentences with shape and meaning. The words plowed in, discovered a former residence, and resolved to stay. He repeated them until he was confident they'd be the right ones, then moved toward the vendors.
"Hey, you!"
called a man weighing vegetables in a saggy blue coat, knit hat, and jeans. He had tobacco-stained teeth, a gray beard, and 1 gold crown.
"What do you want?"
he said in Fujonese. "Hello," said Daniel.
"Where are you from?"
"New York."
"You Chinese?"
"Of course I'm Chinese." He fumbled for his wallet. The word for watermelon had swum up and emerged, and he concentrated until the rest of the sentence returned.
"Give me a watermelon. They're fresh, right? Good watermelon, right?"
He recalled enough to haggle, bumping the guy's price down 25 cents, and it felt like he'd been born again. The man said,
"Go lower than that and my family will starve, thanks to you."
But there was laughter behind his scowl. Daniel accepted the watermelon, triumphant. He pointed to a pile of greens.
"And those, half a pound. Broccoli."
He carried the groceries to Roland's apartment. It was 1 o'clock on a Tuesday, the winter sunlight so bright he had to squint. He had no plans for the rest of the afternoon. For years, he hadn't allowed himself to think of those days after Mama never came home, after Leon left and Vivian left him with strangers. And now he imagined his mother waiting for him on Canal Street with a cigarette. Remembered her duck walk as she made her way across the ice, the firmness of her hand in his. He'd be taller than her now, but there would be safety in her hand. Once, when he and Angel had been talking about their birth families, she had asked if he still wanted to find his mother. And he said no, not anymore. It was enough for him to accept that she was gone. But he'd never had the chance to ask her why she returned to China. She hated Minjiang. Or to understand why he ended up in Ridgeboro. He stopped on a corner, took out his phone, and responded to the email Michael had sent months ago, hitting send before he could change his mind.
You've got the right guy. What's up?
In Roland's kitchen, he steamed the broccoli and cut slices of watermelon. It beat eating another deconstructed burrito at Tres Locos, and was cheaper than eating out. His current credit card balance was $2,079.23, with 18% interest. And that wasn't counting the $10,000 he owed Angel. Seeing the bill every month from the credit card company made him so anxious, he created an auto-withdrawal from his bank account for the minimum payment. Last month it was $22. He hadn't talked to Angel for months. But now he would have to see her on Saturday, at her father's birthday party, along with Peter and Kay. In high school, he'd played Texas Hold'em with other guys at parties and had a talent for noticing their tells while hiding his own, the years with Peter and Kay making him an excellent keeper of secrets. Sophomore year at Potsdam, he heard about online poker, and when he was procrastinating writing papers, he would play a few games, nothing big. Over the summer, living in Ridgeboro with a job painting new 5-bedroom houses on the edge of town, he learned he had a knack for deciphering patterns online. The players who folded often and only bet when they had good hands, the action ones who bet foolishly and gambled too much. Back at school the following fall, he'd met a guy named Kyle who was winning real money, $1,000 in one night. And Daniel started playing more. 6, even 10 hours a day. One sit-and-go tournament after another. Winner takes all. Late one night he emerged from his dorm room to use the bathroom, hearing the sounds of chips and shuffling cards as he refilled his water bottle in the sink. Then scurried back down the hall and resumed playing again, clicking to bet and raise and fold, betting thrice the big blind before the flop and watching his money tick higher. The hours blurred until he heard slamming doors and voices, his body cramped and sore. He'd played into the next day, or the day after. At some point, the overhead light had become painfully bright, and sunlight started falling across the keyboard. He drank Red Bulls, pissed into the empty cans. He bet the pot on a full house and realized he'd been panting out loud. The next day, he heard people shouting his name from a very far distance, and opened the door to see his hallmates there, checking to see if he was still alive. Cards moving across their faces. When Peter and Kay called and asked if he was going to classes, he'd assured them he was. He could win $4,000 in one night of playing tournaments, and then lose that much in 30 minutes. At one point, there was $80,000 in his account. It didn't seem like real money, but it was. He could have withdrawn it and cashed out. But there was always one more game, and one more after that. All he needed was one good win. But the number that constituted a good win changed whenever he hit it. He shut down the account at 0, then put it back up a day later. He went 2 whole days without playing. Drove to Montreal with some friends to see a concert. And afterwards he wanted to buy himself a new guitar, new gear, get back into music. One more game and he'd be set. He'd taken out a private loan to pay for next semester's tuition, since his grades had gotten too low to qualify for financial aid, and burned through the loan money in a day. He borrowed what he could from friends, 20 here, 50 there, opened new credit cards and maxed them out. The shakier he got, the more he lost. And the more he lost, the more of an action player he became. He borrowed $2,000 from Kyle with a promise to repay him in 2 weeks, but knew it was over when he kept losing. Got frazzled when he heard the warning beep that he was running out of time to bet. So he bet half the pot on a 7-2 offsuit, This was a surprise. Suicide was also a rush. He paid Kyle back $200.
Where's the rest?
Kyle said. Kyle and his friends, two beefed-up brothers that looked like they lifted cars for fun, began to come by his room several times a day, asking for the money. Daniel stopped leaving his room or opening the door. Now he was $10,000 in the hole. Angel was going to school in Iowa. She had waitressed all summer and fall, working nights and weekends to save up for her spring semester abroad in Nepal, where she was going to teach at a school for girls, then spend the summer backpacking around Southeast Asia. She'd always loved architecture, geeking out on the layouts of cities, the differences in public transportation. Daniel had been dodging her calls for weeks, but he answered one night and told her about the losing streak, the money he'd borrowed from Kyle. "I need a favor," he finally said. "I'll pay it back in a week." She had been reluctant, but agreed to transfer him $10,000. He would get Kyle off his back, get his account square again, then take out another loan and use that money to pay her. But after paying Kyle, he hadn't planned on his credit being so shot that his application for a loan would be denied. He decided to play one last time, so he could make enough to at least pay Angel something. But he hadn't planned on such a lousy beat. He'd been winning for most of the hand with a pair of aces for his whole cards, only to lose huge to a player named Rich Danger who made 2 pairs on the river. And he hadn't predicted the extent of Angel's anger, or that when he didn't pay her she would call Peter and Kay and tell them about the gambling, though not the money he borrowed. By the time the letter from the dean arrived, he was already in Ridgeboro, attending Gamblers Anonymous in a garage in Littletown. He had told Angel he would make it up to her, that he was going to change. "You mess everything up," she'd said. "Don't call me again." Now he wished he could tell her about writing Michael, going to Rutgers Street. It wasn't just that she was the only person he knew who'd also been adopted. When he had mentioned his adoption to his ex-girlfriend Carla Moody, she had sighed, "That's so beautiful." But talking to Angel was unlike interacting with anyone else his age. She had no pretense. When he talked about music, she never pretended to know more than she did. And he never got bored listening to her. Even when she was going on and on about the differences between the New York City subway system and the London subway system. Or texting him pictures of cats she said she was going to get and never did. Or telling him about the time she and her roommate had run out of gas on a long drive to nowhere and gotten lost in a cornfield. Maybe because they'd known each other all these years, she was almost like a sister. One of the last times they had talked, Angel had told him that her parents had wanted her to be pre-med. "But I'd puke if I had to dissect a dead body. So I told Elaine, sorry, okay, but you're going to have to settle for a social worker or something like that in the family." She said I was throwing my talents away. I mean, seriously, get a grip, Elaine. He had laughed and said, "I'm a shitty professor's kid too." Then we're both black sheep, even if that term is racist. Like the white sheep are supposed to be the good ones. Let's flip it and say white sheep is bad instead. I'm the white sheep. "But you've always been so good to them," she said. "My parents? Nah, I'm not the kind of kid they want." Angel had sounded surprised. "If that was true, you wouldn't even feel bad about it. I bet they're proud of you, even if they can't say it." She told him that in high school she had taken an overdose of sleeping pills, and Elaine and Jim had made her see a therapist who called her hostile. I've never told anyone about that before. Daniel hadn't deleted her phone number from his contacts list. There was still a record of all their text messages, the last one from 4 months ago. He opened a blank message and typed, I miss you. He deleted the first and last words and changed it to, miss talking to you. I'm working on paying you back. Thanks for letting my parents know about the poker. For real. He erased all that and replaced it with, you going to your dad's party Saturday? And pressed send. Now that they were no longer friends, he seemed to have lost the ability to be sincere. And in a single swipe, he deleted all of his and Angel's texts. Hundreds of them. Then deleted her name and number from his phone. He checked his email. Michael hadn't responded yet. And when the phone did ring, it was only Kay. We'll see you on Saturday, she said. Don't forget to bring the forms. He retrieved the Carlow College forms and smoothed them out. The statement of purpose provides an opportunity to explain any extenuating circumstances that could add value to your application as a transfer student to Carlow College. This is your opportunity to address the admissions committee directly and to let us know more about you as an individual in a manner that your transcripts and other application information cannot convey. He started typing. Michael wrote back 2 hours later and suggested meeting tomorrow at a Starbucks near Columbus Circle. The next day, Daniel showed up 20 minutes early and walked around the block 3 times before deciding to wait inside. He ordered a coffee and sat at a table near the door, looking up each time it opened. 1 minute had passed since Daniel had last looked at his phone. 3:42 p.m. No missed calls, no new messages. Michael was supposed to meet Daniel at 3:30. Michael himself had suggested 3:30 at this specific Starbucks on 60th and Broadway. Daniel had agreed to meet Michael out of curiosity, but resolved to maintain a healthy suspicion. Whatever Michael had to tell him, it wasn't going to change his life. He sucked up coffee. If Michael didn't show in the next 10 minutes, he'd leave, call it a day. The door opened again. A beefy white man in a long t-shirt walked in, hand in hand with his similarly built daughter. But before the door could close all the way, a tall Asian guy in a navy blue coat, white sneakers, and a big backpack caught it and came inside. Michael looked around, brightening when he saw Daniel, shoving his way through the tables and chairs. Daniel stood, and his resolve fell away. They hugged. Hard. Michael was an inch taller than Daniel, and they stood there, in the middle of Starbucks, slapping each other on the back. Dumming! Michael took off his bag and pulled out a chair. Sorry I'm late. My professor was talking to me and wouldn't stop. Michael's voice was lower. No longer a kid's voice. Daniel had never heard this not-child Michael. Michael hadn't seen him past the age of 11. No one's called me Dumming in a long time. Michael scrutinized him. You look different. Your face is thinner, though your features are the same. I bet if we saw each other on the street, we would have passed each other. You look different too. Michael's nerd exterior might be gone, but the core of who he was remained. And there was something familiar, visible only to those who had known him when he was a kid. But also the same. It's weird, you having another name. Do you prefer Daniel or Deming? Daniel, I guess. Michael folded his hands in front of him, as if they were in an interview. So, you must be in your junior year of college? I was upstate at SUNY, but I'm taking some time off. He was failing the interview already. Where are you living? Down by Little Italy, Chinatown. I'm crashing at my friend Roland's on Hester Street. We have a band. I play guitar. We've been playing shows around the city. I can totally see that. I remember you used to beg our moms to let us stop and hear the subway musicians, and we'd stand there so long we'd miss the train. Michael laughed. So what's your band called? Psychic Hearts.
I'm working on my own songs, too. Just me singing and playing guitar. Real pared down, almost confessional kind of stuff.
It was the first time he'd ever spoken about this out loud.
Let me know when your next concert is. I'll come. All right.
Daniel pictured a guy like Michael at a loft show. Someone more out of place than himself.
And you're going to Columbia, right? Yeah. I went to Brooklyn Tech for high school.
Michael put his phone down on the table.
I was late because I'm applying for this assistantship thing. I have to propose this genetics research project, and I'm trying to decide between two of them. One's the kind of stuff that my faculty sponsor does. That's the professor I was talking to before. He's writing my recommendation. So if I go with that project, I might have a better chance. But there's this other project that has less precedence, so less chance for success. It's the one I want to do. When's the application due? In 2 weeks. Wish me luck.
Their eyes met for a moment. Daniel wanted to observe Michael for as long as he needed, attempting to reconcile the guy across the table with the skinny kid who had tagged alongside him in the Bronx. For 5 years, they had shared a bed.
How's your mom doing? She's good. Real good. She married my stepfather, Timothy, a few years ago, and we moved to his place in Brooklyn, in Sunset Park. I'm still there, commuting to school, but I'm hoping to move out soon.
Michael passed his phone over, displaying a picture of a family in a grassy yard, Vivian and Timothy with their arms around Michael.
This is from last summer.
Timothy had a small potbelly and a receding hairline. Vivian's hair was short and permed curly. Daniel peeked at the photo and passed the phone back.
You still in touch with Leon? Uncle Leon? Yeah, he's still in Fuzhou. He got married and has a daughter now. He works for a manufacturing company. We talked a few times, but he's not much of a phone person. But he's doing good.
Michael played with the strap on his watch. It was a chunky silver watch, something a middle-aged man might wear.
We didn't stay in that apartment too long after you left. We moved in with this family in Chinatown. Then we moved to Queens, and my mom got this job in the building where Timothy worked. Oh.
Some small part of Daniel had been hoping Leon and his mother had found each other and had been living together. And for some perfectly logical reason, though he couldn't figure out what that might be, they had been unable to get in touch with him.
So I found these papers over Christmas break when I was helping my mom clean up boxes in our apartment, Michael said. There was this form she signed, voluntarily transferring you to the care of social services. It said the placement would be for an indefinite period of time.
Daniel said nothing, remembering the papers he'd seen in Peter and Kay's desk. The report from the permanency hearing. Hadn't it said something about Vivian signing a surrender form? He didn't remember anything about it being for an indefinite period.
I know, it's screwed up, Michael said. And there was this other form that said she'd gone to court for a hearing a few weeks after you left. She approved a foster placement with Peter and Kay Wilkinson.
On the Starbucks speakers, a woman was braying along to a strumming ukulele. Daniel was plummeting from the final board of a video game down to level 1 after accidentally missing the most elementary of jumps. Vivian and Leon had never planned on coming back for him. The thought of Vivian going to court after dropping him off with that Chinese couple, signing him over to the Wilkinsons without his knowledge, made him nauseous.
I'm sorry. I wanted you to know. Michael shook his head. I thought about you and your mom all the time. She was a cool mom. One time, I don't know where you were, but she took me to Burger King because she was craving fries. And she bought me fries too. And on our way home, we passed this empty lot full of pigeons, and she said, super seriously, "Michael, in China we'd eat those bitches, but steamed, because their meat is tough." She was real funny, you know? I know she was. How did you even find me? I Googled Peter and Kay Wilkinson and found a website with an article Kay Wilkinson wrote, and it said in her bio that she had a son named Daniel. I found a profile picture of a Chinese-looking Daniel Wilkinson that looked like it could be you. It mentioned SUNY Potsdam, so I looked that up and figured out your email address. Shit. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you wrote me back. When I found those papers, I thought you could have ended up with a bad family. Anything could have happened to you. Michael looked away. That morning, that last time I saw you, I would have tried to stop my mom if I knew where she was going. You guys went out, and when she got home, you weren't with her. I was scared. After he and Angel took the cab to the Bronx and saw the family who wasn't his, Daniel had gone home to Ridgeboro and cried at night for weeks. 4 months later, he and Peter and Kay had gone to court and a judge had approved his adoption. They'd signed papers. The judge congratulated them on becoming a forever family. He received a new birth certificate, listing Peter and Kay as his birth parents, and his name as Daniel Wilkinson. What did your mom tell you? He asked Michael. Back then? She said she found another family for you to live with and take care of you. At first, she said it was only going to be for a little while. I was pissed. Freaked out. Especially since it wasn't for a little while, you know? It never seemed right. But I couldn't do anything. I didn't know how to find you. So, over Christmas, after I found the forms, I asked her and she didn't want to talk about it. But I kept bugging her. And finally she said she'd done it because she had no choice. We were broke. She said she did the best thing for you. The best thing. Daniel concentrated on reading the list of drink specials over the cash register. Venti latte. The words seemed strange, like they weren't English. The smell of coffee and artificial sugar was overpowering and cloying. Does Leon know I was adopted? I'm assuming my mother told him, but I can't say for sure. Daniel rested his face in his hands, pressing down on the spot between his eyebrows. Indefinite placement, he thought. I can't believe this. You were like my brother, you know? Yeah. I tried Googling you before, but there were never any results for Domingo. Well, that's no longer me. Your parents, Peter and Kay Wilkinson, were they good parents? Sure. But I lost my whole family. You never heard from your mother? No. And I guess you never did either. Michael shook his head. But my mom wants to see you. What? She wants to have you over for dinner. Michael watched Daniel's face, awaiting Daniel's response. Like he used to when he was a kid, ready to pack up and run away to Florida without hesitation. Are you serious? Daniel said. No fucking way. Friday night, Daniel took the subway out to Sunset Park, Brooklyn, Chinatown. And as he walked down 8th Avenue, he recognized the neighborhood as where the Chinese couple had lived, where Peter and Kay had come to get him. He didn't know how he would get through this dinner without saying something terrible to Vivian, but the chance to say anything to her pushed him on.
They lived on one of the numbered streets off 8th Avenue, in the bottom half of a 2-family home, a 2-bedroom apartment with a large front window that looked out onto the street. The house smelled like rice and pork and garlic. He removed his shoes and jacket, returned Michael's hug, and saw Vivian padding toward them in fuzzy purple slippers, plumper than she'd been 10 years ago. He didn't remember her teeth being so bright before. "Duming! You look the same," she said in Fujonese. "Big and tall and healthy, exactly like your mother." How could she mention his mother after what she had done?
"Hi, Vivian."
"Do you still like pork?"
"Of course."
"I made pork and fish." Vivian pointed to the kitchen. "We'll eat soon." Michael and Daniel sat on a dark brown couch facing a widescreen television and a shelf with glass figurines of unicorns.
"Remember that couch we had?"
Daniel asked.
"That thing was busted,"
Michael said.
"It had those giant flowers and puke colors. Remember that time that kid beat me up and you went and beat him up? And then your mom went and beat me up."
Michael laughed.
"Yeah, sounds about right." I really loved that apartment.
"You remember that kid Sop Heap? I heard he's in jail.
And there was that time those guys got killed in the park. I don't remember that."
Daniel ran names, tried to match them to faces, the kids of PS-33 with their giant backpacks. He tried to remember Sop Heap. The park. Which park? And was alarmed at the inaccuracy of his memory, wondering what else had he forgotten. How much had he gotten wrong about his mother, Leon, even himself?
"Remember Tommy? Our neighbor? I used to think my mom ran away with him."
"That guy?" Michael cracked up.
"No way!" "I heard he got married."
"God, I haven't thought about him in years." Timothy arrived, carrying a white bakery box wrapped in red string.
"You must be Duming,"
he said.
"I've heard so much about you."
His English had Chinese-shaped tones, and his vowels were warm and curved. Vivian had cooked a casserole of tofu and beef and mushrooms, greens with garlic, noodles, crispy pork, even a whole steamed fish. The smells were comforting, ones Daniel hadn't experienced in years. Timothy handed him a plate.
"You're in school, Duming?"
he asked in English. He wasn't sure if he wanted to be called Duming.
"I'm a communications major. At SUNY. I play music, too. Guitar. I go by Daniel now."
"Daniel. So you like the arts and the humanities. Michael is more into the sciences."
"What kind of work do you do?"
"I'm a CPA. Accountant. That's how Vivian and I met." Timothy switched to Mandarin.
"Vivian worked in the office across the hall."
Vivian cut the greens. "I cleaned the office." It sounded like a script she and Timothy had recited before. "Me and Michael lived with my friends in Queens. We had no money."
"One day we met in the elevator at work,"
Timothy said. "That was a long time ago," Vivian said. "Things are so much better now. Michael's going to Columbia, and Duming is in college too. Your mother would be proud." Daniel picked out fish bones, wanting to ask Vivian what she knew. His mother might have wanted him, after all. She couldn't have known that Vivian would give him away. He took seconds, thirds, fourths, trying to ignore Vivian's pleased expression as he loaded up his plate again. The credit she was surely taking for cooking so well, for feeding the starved orphan boy. He couldn't get sucked into how good the food tasted, how familiar it felt to be here. Timothy passed Daniel the plate of greens.
"Duming, Daniel, you still speak Chinese?" "Yes," Daniel said in Mandarin. "I still speak Chinese." You have an American accent. I have it too.
Michael still speaks perfect Chinese, Vivian said. He can even write in Chinese. She unveiled the contents of the bakery box, revealing a fluffy white sponge cake, a cloud of frosting studded with strawberry slices. And Daniel pretended he was watching a scene from television, narrated by the authoritative male voice of nature documentaries. The female animal cares only for its biological young. It rejects any non-biological children as a threat to the family unit. When they finished dessert, Michael collected silverware from the table. Vivian brought plates into the kitchen, and Daniel got up.
Sit,
Timothy said. But Daniel grabbed the dishes and trailed Vivian. He was much taller than her, and could see the white roots in her thinning hair, a baby bald spot on top of her skull. He spoke fast, in English. Vivian's English was much better than it had been 10 years ago, but he still had the upper hand.
Why did you do it?
She transferred food to plastic containers and pressed down on the lids, double-checking to make sure they were sealed. Do what? He turned the faucet on and pumped soap onto a sponge.
You said you'd be back for me soon, but you signed a form that gave me away to strangers. Indefinitely.
I don't know what you're talking about. Vivian opened the refrigerator, restacked the containers, and pulled out other leftovers to make room. She removed a carton of orange juice, squinted at the label.
You made me think my mother abandoned me, that she didn't want me.
Vivian studied a gallon of milk. You could have been deported.
How? I'm an American citizen.
He turned to check that Michael and Timothy were still at the table.
What do you know about my mother? Where is she?
Vivian's face was hidden by the refrigerator door. I don't know anything. He scrubbed the dishes, scraped hard, making his skin sting.
You actually went to court to get rid of me forever. You screwed up my whole life.
I didn't screw up anything. You wouldn't be in college otherwise. You wouldn't be living in Manhattan and playing on your guitar. If you stayed with your mother, you'd be poor. You'd be back in the village.
That's where she is? Minjiang?
Vivian's words were quiet and tunneled. I don't know. It didn't add up. There was no explanation for Mama's absence, her never getting in touch. Daniel looked at Vivian, staring hard, daring her to face him.
Is she dead?
At last, she turned around. No.
How do you know?
Because of Leon.
He walked to the subway after hugging Michael and shaking Timothy's hand. See you soon, Michael said. Don't forget to let me know about your next concert.
In Daniel's pocket was an envelope that Vivian had given him as he was leaving. Less than half a block from the house, he ducked beneath a store awning and opened it. Inside was a $100 bill and a slip of paper with a bunch of numbers that could pass for a long-distance phone number in China. Leon, it said. Daniel put the envelope in his pocket and laughed. A hot, jelly laugh. Until he was shaking. As if $100 was supposed to make it all better. He walked until the block of shuttered storefronts dead-ended and took a left, reaching the entrance of Sunset Park. The air was warm, the trees in bloom. He made his way up a hill, above the streets and storefronts. A family trundling along the path below. The father pushing a stroller with a silvery red balloon tied to the handle. Daniel saw the Manhattan skyline, recognized the sketched spire of the Empire State Building, the sparkle of bridges, and from this vantage point the city appeared vulnerable and twinkling. The last strands of sunshine swept across the arches as if lulling them to sleep, painting shadows against the tops of buildings. No matter how many times he saw the city's outline, he pitched inside. He had Leon's number. His mother was alive. Leon knew where his mother was. They had been in touch. The prospect made him rubbery. Knees quivering, he folded in half and burped garlic and strawberry cake. Then he was cold. When Vivian pressed the envelope into Daniel's hands, she had also said this: "I paid your mother's debt. When Leon left, there was still money owed. Who do you think paid? If I hadn't paid, you'd be dead by now." Unable to decide whether to hate Vivian or be grateful to her, Daniel had only been able to take the envelope and say, "Thank you." He dug his heels into the dirt and walked downhill, down the park's curved side, slow at first, getting faster, a grace note as his legs bounced upwards. He would go home. He would call Leon. Propelled, he was almost in flight. Part 2. Jackpot. 6. The night you came back into my life, I was walking down the same old street in Fuzhou. From World Top English to the seafood restaurant where Jung always had his client dinners. He offered to pick me up, but I said no. Wanted those 20 precious minutes to myself. In my gray suit and leather shoes, I could pass for a city person. My life felt like a confection, something I had once yearned for. But sometimes I still wanted to torch it all over again, change my name again, move to another city again, rent a room in a building where nobody knew me. When I thought of all the seafood dinners I'd gone to and all the ones I had yet to attend, I felt an empty, endless doom. Walking in Fuzhou. Bicyclists, mopeds, trash bags, busted furniture, city people, migrants, all fighting for not enough sidewalk space. I walked to lose track of the life that had solidified around me when I hadn't been paying attention. I liked how close the past felt, how possible it might be to make up a new history. All the different routes I might have taken, all the seemingly insignificant turns that could change your entire existence. I could have become anyone, living anywhere. But let's be real. I was 40 years old and most of my choices had already been made. Made for me. Not so easy to veer off course now. Jung didn't see the need to walk when he had a perfectly good car. Had no curiosity for exploring the city he'd lived in all his life. If he wanted an adventure, he said, he wouldn't walk around a couple of office buildings. He'd take a trip to Hong Kong or Bangkok or Shanghai. Though he never did those things either. Lately, Boss Cheng had been assigning my coworker Bo Qing to do market research on expanding World Top to other cities. And I'd experienced envy so sharp I could smell it. Last week, that chump Bo Qing had gone to Taizhou. And next week, he was off to Zhangzhou. I wanted to travel. But Boss Cheng hadn't asked me because traveling like that was supposed to be an inconvenience, a responsibility given to a more junior employee. Jung hated traveling for work, but I would have jumped at the chance to even take the 3-hour bullet train to Xiamen. I could sit by the window and watch the cranes and backhoe diggers, cement spreading like a cracked egg across Fujian province. Fields flattening into housing foundations, villages shaped into towns, all of it whizzing by at 250 kilometers an hour. There was a thick crowd outside Pizza Hut, waiting to get in. Jung and I had our first dinner there, 7 years ago.
We went after the last English for Executives class. He'd been one of my worst students, and he told me his wife had died young, of leukemia, and they hadn't had children, which was okay by him. He said he'd bought his apartment new, paid in full, in cash. "I'm a self-made businessman," he said, trying to play it cool. But I knew he wouldn't have been able to get the permits and licenses to start a business without urban hukou. It reminded me of those rich young people Didi and I used to see in New York, with their beat-up jeans and uncombed hair. I told Young I had lived in America, and he said, "You must have studied English in university." I didn't correct him. I neither confirmed nor denied. He called me brilliant, hard-working, and kind. And we both fell in love with this version of Polly. My office job and my English, that one suit I'd saved up for months to buy, that was enough for this city man to believe in my authenticity. So I wasn't about to let him down. And here we were, 7 years later. The illusion and the reality one and the same. Polly, the woman who lived near Westlake and who had gone to university, decided not to have children. Yet it always felt temporary, like one day I'd be exposed, plucked out of the 12th floor apartment and deposited right back into Ardsleyville. We got married 6 months after that first dinner. The marriage, the sex, they weren't as boring as I had feared. I got on the pill and figured I'd tell Young about you eventually. Say you were staying with relatives in America. But the months passed, and then it seemed too late and too significant to reveal. A person could turn angry at any time. Telling him now? It would be worse than not telling him at all. I was 10 minutes late. When I walked into the banquet room, Young said to the table, "My wife was working." "Walking, not working," I said. Fu, a balding man Young introduced to me as the Walmart buyer, sat between him and Zhao, Young's partner at the textile factory. I took the empty seat next to Zhao's wife, Lu Jin. Young was wearing the silver cufflinks I bought him for our 6th wedding anniversary. Crevices bookended his eyes and mouth. He was handsome in a semi-ruined way. His beauty was that his beauty was behind him, his appeal reflecting what he had already survived. Though he'd laugh at this because he was not into nostalgia. "I can barely remember anything before the age of 30, he liked to say. Maybe he was lying. To his colleagues, he played like his success had been effortless. Though before each big meeting, he practiced what he was going to say in front of a mirror, wrote his lines down and memorized them. I helped. The food came fast. A plate piled with prawns, another with scallops and vegetables, jellyfish, conch, abalone. Lu Jin poured tea. "How's business?" A smear of lipstick desecrated one of her front teeth. I didn't bring this to her attention. "Our enrollment is at a record high." I speared a prawn and tore off its head, laying it to rest on my plate. An eye looked up at me. "Everyone wants to learn English." "I don't need English." Lu Jin chomped on a large scallop. "We're doing business in Shanghai." Lu Jin was a northerner who'd never forgiven her husband for returning to his home province to run a factory. And Zhao liked to brag about her fluent Mandarin and Shanghainese, those pristine, elegant tones. Dinner parties at Zhao and Lu Jin's house in Jiangbin involved Lu Jin cooking complicated, flavorless meals, as Zhao drank beer after beer, and his belly got so bloated he'd have to loosen his belt one notch. Then another. At these parties, the men would complain about the Sichuanese, who used to work for nearly nothing but were no longer migrating to Fuzhou in such large amounts, working instead at new factories in Shenzhen.
Jung was the kind of boss who loved to complain about being a boss. His complaints were not actual complaints, but well-crafted brags. Jung Tex was doing well enough that he had things to worry about. At these parties, the women's conversations were worse. Because I was expected to participate. Ha! What private schools were the best? Which house cleaners were cheap but honest? There'd be the circulation of a home renovation catalog. Pictures of one disembodied kitchen cabinet after another, laid out and shot in flattering poses like swimsuit models. Pictures of empty pots on sparkling stoves and smiling mothers, fathers, and children, all of them black-haired and dark-eyed with improbably pale skin and long legs. Where could such specimens be found in Fuzhou? I'd flip through the pages and remember the plasticky couch in our Bronx apartment. Those nights when hot dogs and instant noodles for dinner were more than enough. Or other nights, having left everything I'd known for a new city, thrilled and frightened at what I had done. Jung was on his second beer. Zhao and Fu on their third.
We have $6 million in exports per fiscal year,
Zhao said.
We delivered our Christmas orders early last year. The production cost for Walmart was 1/4 the retail price.
Jung turned to me.
My wife worked in New York City for a long time. She's an English teacher now. Does international translation for Jung Tex.
Fu looked over. I channeled my teacher voice. I've seen the factories in America, and they can't compete with Jung Tex.
What are the buildings like in New York?
Fu asked. Tall, beautiful, majestic. Lu Jin looked down at her plate and scratched her thigh.
And the weather?
Hot and sunny in the summertime, and snow in the winter.
Fuzhou could be a top-rate city, but it's being taken over by bad influences, Fu said. Too many outsiders.
Cheap labor, Lu Jin said.
12 people crammed into one room, Zhao said. You live like that, don't be expected to be treated any better than vermin.
I hated hearing shit like this, but I held back. Jung had asked me here so I could make a good impression on the Walmart buyer. The one time I'd talked back to a client about Sichuanese workers, Jung hadn't gotten the deal. For weeks, he fretted about losing the apartment, never being able to afford to move to Jiangbin like he wanted to. The potential collapse of Jung Tex.
I don't know why you're not worried,
he said. And I was about to tell him he was overreacting, that none of that would happen, when I saw how afraid he actually was, heard the tremble in his voice. Jung's worst fear was being exposed as a fraud, committing some fatal mistake that would result in a plunge in status.
The city was full of people like this. It was easy to make money and easier to lose it.
But because Jung had never gone without, he couldn't imagine surviving on less. I took my phone out of my bag. The screen announced a new message from an unknown number. I hadn't heard it ring. I excused myself and walked out to the restaurant foyer, dialed the code to get my voicemail.
Hello?
Said a man's voice. It was slow, almost hesitant. Fujonese laced with a weird, unplaceable accent.
This is a message for Polly Guo.
At first I thought it was a client calling to complain about World Top, or another development in Jung's never-ending kitchen renovations.
This is your son, Deming.
My heart sped up. I listened to the message again. Your voice was a deep man's voice, but there was something recognizable in it, though your Chinese sucked.
I am good. New York is where I live. Leon, your number gave me. Leon, I found. Michael found me. You are good? I would like to talk to you.
You left me a phone number and said I could call you any time. I put my fingers in my mouth and bit. Pain darted down my arms. Were you okay? How did you find me? I hadn't spoken to Leon in years. When the hostess looked over, I took my fingers out and tried to smile. "Business call," I said. For so long I had wanted to find you. Leon had told me you'd been adopted by Americans, that they were taking care of you. He insisted you were in good hands, and I tried so hard to believe him, because the only way to keep going was to act as if you were totally gone, that we were both better off staying put in the lives we had. But if I'd had a choice in it, and I hadn't, I would never have let you go. Never. I played the message again, saved the number in my phone. If I ignored the accent and shitty grammar, you sounded okay. And there were no signs that you were sick or unhappy. When I returned, the big plates of food seemed grotesque, indulgent. Zhao and Fu raised their glasses. "To success," Yong said. I repeated the toast, but my hand was shaking. "Fu was impressed by your time in New York," Yong said as he steered the minivan up the hill. I checked my phone. No new calls. "I hope the deal is signed." "I hope so too." We parked in our building's garage, took the elevator up to the 12th floor. The tiles, so nice and cool during the humid summers, felt chilly under my feet. I raised the heat on the digital thermostat. Cold was scratchy brown blankets, a chill that wrapped around my bones. I took a plastic bottle of water from a box in the kitchen and tried to ignore the drywall dust and construction tarp draped across the counters. A memory twitched. The Bronx kitchen. "Mama?" You said, standing there with your underpants over your face. You were 6 or 7 years old, and you laughed as you walked toward me with your arms sticking out like a monster's. You. I clawed at the image, but it bounded away. How swiftly it tumbled out of control. From your hand to Leon's mouth to nail polish to Star Hill and Ardsleyville. I took off my makeup. We changed into our pajamas and sat on the couch, leaning against each other, and watched an episode of a Korean historical drama that took place in medieval times. Yong played with my hair. I rubbed his hands. This was my favorite time of day. When we were home together. Didn't have to worry about how we looked or what we said. In New York, it was morning. Did you still look like me? How tall were you? We used to play peekaboo in the boarding house on Rutgers Street, and you'd hide as I walked around, asking my roommates, "Did you see Deming? Where is he?" Until you giggled and I'd go, "I think I hear something." Then you, chubby, accusing, mine, would emerge from your hiding space and point at me and shout, "You lost me!" Your adoptive family probably lived near Central Park in one of those big-ass brick buildings with a gold-plated name on the outside and a doorman in a uniform. When the episode ended, the heroine and her lover hiding from the king's army, Yong and I went to bed. We had a large, firm mattress, thick, soft sheets. "Long day," he said, laying next to me. As soon as he fell asleep, I'd go out to the balcony and call you. Yes, it'll be nice to get a good night's rest. There was very little sound in our apartment. Only the refrigerator hum and other vague whirrings that powered the constant pleasantry of the place. keeping our life steady and moderate. I looked at our high ceilings and clean walls, on which I'd hung framed prints of paintings, abstract shapes in vivid blues and greens. I loved the home we'd made together, the way we left secret notes for each other. This morning I found one that said, "Potatoes for dinner tonight," inside my bag. An inside joke referring to the shape of Zhao's head. I loved our wooden floors, the large windows that overlooked the city. On a clear day, you could even see a wedge of ocean. The first time I saw the water from Yong's balcony, I knew I had to live here. What a relief it had been to find him, to have someone to come home to, letting the everyday concerns take over. Lesson planning at World Top English and where to go to dinner. Filling myself up with tasks and conversation and possessions until there was no longer space to think about you. This was what could happen in a city like this. A woman could come from nowhere and become a new person. A woman could be arranged like a bouquet of fake flowers, bent this way and that, scrutinized from a distance, rearranged. It was too much of a lie to reveal to Yong now that I had a 21-year-old son I'd somehow never mentioned before. You couldn't omit your own child from the story of your life, like it was no big deal. Yong disapproved of Liu Jin and Zhao putting their daughter in boarding school. And compared to that, what I'd done was unforgivable. I didn't want to think about it. Didn't want to remember. If I called you, and if Yong found out I had lied about having a child, he would be so angry. And then he would leave me. And I would have to give up being myself. I was tired. I took out my pill bottle, removed a pill. Without it, I'd be dreaming of brown blankets and dogs. You waving to me from inside a subway train that leaves the station as soon as I get to the platform. But the pill would push me down and swiftly under, to safety. And every morning I woke up dreamless. The hours between getting into bed and hearing the alarm clock, an urgent beeping from the shore as I struggled to swim to the surface. A dense void. 11 at night and 6:30 in the morning, only seconds apart. Yong wrapped his arms and legs around mine. We lay there together, like we had every night for the past 7 years. I put my head on his chest. You and Michael would be laughing. Vivian and I talking at the table. I know it's a mess, but it'll be done soon, he said. What are you talking about? The kitchen. His eyes perked. I spoke to the contractors about the cabinets. They're going to special order them. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. He kissed me. Good night. I tugged my sleep mask down. Yong could fall asleep in broad daylight, but I insisted on heavy curtains in the bedroom. Sometimes his ability to sleep soundly felt like a personal offense. I listened to his breathing, deep and regular, as the pill began to take me under. I was too tired to talk now. I'd wait and call you another day. Good night, I said. But Yong didn't say anything. He was already asleep. And it was only my own voice I heard, talking to myself in that dark, quiet room.